So ways to encourage participation, and there's some guidelines there around non-verbal communication, eye contact, be attentive to making eye contact with all your participants. This is very important, you know, scan the room, make sure that you cover all your participants, and be careful not to miss out an area in your room. Sometimes we get a difficult question from one participant, and the candidate, we feel that they're sort of challenging us, and we have a bit of a difference of a point of view, and you will tend to subconsciously, very often, you will tend to then not look at that person when you lecture further on. I don't know if you've ever experienced that. The problem, however, if you miss out one participant because of that reason, then you also miss out the participants next to them. Also be careful when you move into the U shape. You might be with your back towards those participants at the ends of the tables. So just make sure that you move back again and cover their areas as well. Head nodding, nod your head to show understanding and to encourage participants to continue. What do you think about head nodding? Does it mean that if my participant, my candidate or student nods his or her head, that they're actually showing that they agree with me? What do you say? Is it necessarily agreement?
No, I would say no, not. It says that you're following.
Following, yep, following maybe.
Acknowledgement.
Acknowledgement, yes. I hear what you say. I acknowledge that I'm listening. Natasha, you wanted to say?
No, I would agree the same, yeah.
All right, all right. But it doesn't necessarily mean if my student nods his or her head that they're agreeing with me. They're just nodding because they are acknowledging I'm hearing you. They might be agreeing, but it doesn't necessarily indicate agreement. So you've got to be very attentive for body language. You also start to get to know your audience. Some of your students will very often nod their head in acknowledgement, and some in agreement, but you know that head nodding doesn't necessarily mean agreement as well. Therefore, if you're in doubt, just ask, do you agree with me? Or ask a question, check for understanding, and just make sure that there was real understanding and not just a movement of the head. Posture, avoid defensive postures. You know, they do say, and studies have shown that communication is carried, the meaning of communication, the meaning is carried across more than 70% body language and tone of voice. And a very small percentage of the meaning is carried across with the words that you say. So it's so important to align what you're saying with your body language. If you have a negative body language, arms crossed, maybe frown on your face, you give a very positive message, but because of this negative interpretation of your body language, the message will come across as negative. So make sure that your body language, the message that you're carrying across, the tone of voice works together and is in full alignment. Body movement. Do you think it's important that we move as facilitators? In other words, move around in the class?
I would say not too much, because it can tire them out because they're going to watch you all the time. So movement is, but also just to keep them going at the time, not to see it as boring, you know. So movement sometimes as well, but not continuously.
Okay,
that's my take.
Thank you, Andrew. Landi?
Yes, Saki, I will do like say for instance, if we start in the morning, then I will maybe just sit down or whatever. But when it goes in later in during the day, then I will start walking, because then is it with people tend to get tired, or the graveyard shift Then they are lazy after their lunch or stuff. So then I would walk around so that they can just pay attention.
Oh, good point. Yeah. So also moving closer to some of your, you can sense in the body language those students that feels a bit tired and they feel I'm ready for a bit of a nap now rather than listening to Lundy, and just moving closer, asking questions. And the very important thing is you might also be feeling like that, but your energy levels, you have to pick it up and keep your energy levels high, because that will be aansteeklik, soos in Afrikaans will say. It'll be contagious. You cannot afford that your energy levels are also going down. Otherwise, the whole room will just go to sleep eventually. So keep the energy up, body movement, move around. Don't move too much. Andrew is absolutely right. With one of my previous students, this guy, he moved 4 steps forward, 4 steps back, 4 steps forward, and everybody just started to smile, and they eventually asked, but why are you doing that? And he says, what am I doing? No, and they're explaining, you can't move so much, it's distracting. He says, well, I wasn't even aware. I'm so nervous that, you subconsciously do things and you're actually not aware that it's irritating your students. So it is also, and he had a paper in his hand and he was swinging this paper, and ask him, are you actually using that paper for a reason? He says, no, not really. So it's part of your nerves. You do things subconsciously that irritates your students. So it helps to ask your students or ask one of your colleagues to sit in and just give you feedback of the things that you do that irritates others. And very often we're not even aware that we're doing that. But yeah, body movement important. One of my previous students says that he would move, if they have a PowerPoint slideshow, he would move to the back of the room while he's sort of lecturing and talking to the slides. And I know some facilitators do that. Just be careful, don't do it too often, because you also lose contact, eye contact, body language contact with your audience. So you can do it at some times of the facilitation, but you need to stay in control. If you want to discuss a slide, it's better to just stand next to the slide and point towards the slide with your pointer. If you want to further discuss that slide, switch it off and get all your audience attention on you as the person who's speaking and carrying over the message. Because the more distraction we have around, then the more the chances is that your students are going to drift around with their attention. Remember the attention, keep it focused. If you want them to look at the slide on, show towards the slide, you can talk to it, but then if you want to discuss further or have a question answer session, slide off and have your discussion session, except if it's a picture or a statement that you want to keep on the slide. That's a different story. Smiling, yeah, look, there's times when if you're serious, you will not smile, you're going to be serious, and and you need to get that serious message across. It's not going to be with a smile on your face though. So verbal communication, praise and encouragement. I'm glad you brought that up. Tell me more. It really adds and encourages further discussion. You can imagine you make a statement, your facilitator just ignores you. You will be reluctant to participate in future. So it just encourages learners to continue participating, continue giving their input, and it just adds to a great discussion. Good point. What else? Who else has an idea? I would like to hear your thoughts about the following. So you can then, if a student gives you an answer which is not totally spot on or correct, you will still acknowledging the fact that he actually did give the answer, but you will then ask some more input from other students, and then you will add from your side, clarifying exactly what the correct answer is, because you might not get the correct answer from your students at a given time. Accept and use ideas, accept feelings. If you feel some of your students or a student is quite emotional about a specific topic, accept that fact, show empathy, carry on with the discussion. Art of questioning. Questioning is asking questions and allowing our students to ask questions, very important tools for the facilitator to get the discussion going and to expand on the message. So the reasons why people would ask questions: to obtain information. I think that's the most obvious reason. To impress others. Have you ever experienced that? You've got somebody that asks all these difficult questions, but you sense that they actually have the answer, but they just needed to ask the question to show, their knowledge level, or to impress the others around them. You can, for instance, then also ask, would you like to share the answer with us? And you will find that they actually have the answer and can share the answer. To get to the trainer, they want to catch you out. Have you ever experienced that? Students that wants to catch you out. They've done a bit of Google University study and they read about the topic, and now they want to challenge you as a facilitator to check whether you're actually knowledgeable on the subject. Lundy, have you experienced that? See your nod your head.
Yes, Saki, a lot, especially when you've got that older, not older, but maybe they already did that subject, or they know a little bit more, or there's even some of them that want to impress the rest, and they want you to look bad. So I've got that a lot, and you have to deal with it some way or another, in a way that it doesn't sound rude or look rude, but you have to deal with it.
Yeah. So how would you, can you think of an instance and share how you actually dealt with that specific instance?
In that situation, you open your floor, your discussions. Okay. You open up, and then that person, you know what happened then? Then the rest of the class, they will ask that person a lot of the questions, to the extent that he can't answer them maybe anymore. And then you step up to the plate, and then it looks like you are the clever one.
Yeah. That's a good technique. Except if the student really has all the answers, and knows more than what you do. I guess that's possible. You have experts on your training, and then you can acknowledge it, and you actually use that person as a source.
Actually, that happened a lot, Saki. And then you have a kind of your backup, because that means that student, they are also informed, and there is stuff that you don't know. So then you have you can your backup. It's a team effort there.
Yeah. Now you want that person on your side. You don't want to alienate or alienate anybody in your class, but if it's necessary and somebody's really contributing a lot and it's really not contributing to the value of the class, or they give you incorrect responses, I think very often the rest of the class sorts that person out. Somehow they gang up against a person that's disruptive, but that person who can really work with you, add to the value of the discussion, is always helpful. Just be careful. We don't necessarily, it is important that we as facilitators must also be very good subject matter experts. So in other words, you don't want too many instances where you actually refer back to a student. You still need to be in control, and you still need to have the respect of the rest of your students. Okay, to help the trainer, yeah, we were just talking about that example. Keep from going back to work. Stretching out the discussions, stretching out, asking more questions. Just because I don't want to go back to work. And we had that when I worked for Atlantis Diesel Engines many years ago, when we had meetings or training sessions. We just find when we get towards the end of that session, they would start to ask new questions or additional questions and try to extend the discussion. We use this technique in those years. We still call it matric or standaard 10. Ag, wat was dit? Ja, standaard matriek, ja. Ek wys my ouderdom, ek kan nie eens onthou van hoe ons matriek noem nie. And we ask our Afrikaans teacher, if we're not in the mood for class, we would ask them, please explain, it's a certain engine that Mazda used at the time, the Wankel engine. I don't know if any of you have heard of the Wankel engine, but it was it didn't work in the normal way as a normal engine. It was shaped in such a way that it just had a totally different technique. So he would spend the whole 40 minutes just explaining this Wankel engine because he was absolutely passionate about the new technology. So that was just one of those techniques that we used, not to be involved in the actual class itself. Okay, ground rules at the beginning. It's a very good principle to use, to agree on ground rules. And what's the kind of ground rules that you would want to establish in your training? What would you like to establish as a rule before you start training?
I think just for suggestions for ground rules, firstly, no politics, no religion, no talk of any kind that influence or interferes with the diversity of the current group in front of you. That's the beginning point of facilitating or training.
Yeah, yeah. What else?
And of course,
Cell phones on mute or switch off.
Cell phones. Oh my goodness, cell phones. And you know, it's, I think, maybe not reasonable to ask the students to switch off their cell phones. We hardly ever switch off our cell phones. Mute doesn't always help if the cell phone is still on the desk, because, you know, these messages will come in Facebook and WhatsApp and everybody's communicating and you see the screen lighting up. That's distracting. So the best is to ask the student to put the cell phone away in the bag or in the pocket so that they can't see it. And just say, look, the principle here is that the cell phone or your laptop or your tablet must not disrupt the training. We're going to take a break, give them the break times, give them their lunch times, and say you can attend to those messages during that time. Obviously, if there's somebody that expects an emergency call, my wife is in hospital, I'm going to have my first baby, that's totally a different story. But I think you got to be serious and you got to get that message across to all the students. Cell phones must not disrupt our training. And then things like timeliness, you know, we agree on a specific time and that everybody's back within or by that specific time. With one group, we had a rule that if you're late, you have to sing and also dance for the class. And this one guy, he was late, and then when I heard him sing and I saw him dance, I thought this guy's going to be late every time because he just loves doing it. It was not a punishment for him. And everybody just enjoyed it. And I said, look, why don't you sing and dance in any case? You can be on time, but we will still allow you to sing and dance. And that obviously worked for him. So that was great. Repeat the question. Why would we want to, oh, sorry, just back to setting ground rules. I think it's also important that you stress with your students that it's okay to ask questions. There's no such thing as this is my last question or this is a dumb or stupid question. You really want to create an environment where they feel comfortable to ask questions. Even if they feel themselves, it may be a silly question, for them to just feel comfortable to ask that question. You know, very often, the other students in the class would just feel very relieved that somebody is actually asking this question, because there's others that also didn't understand the topic. Also, to participate, encourage participation, share their points of view, share their past experience, and that just lead to further discussion. Right, repeating the question. When would we repeat the question? Ensure that the rest of the group has heard the question. There's nothing so frustrating to hear a facilitator giving an answer. You don't know what the question was. So it is important, especially when you have a larger group, with your U-shape students being further away at the end of the U-shape, and the student sitting closer to you is just going to speak loud enough for you to hear, but the others don't necessarily hear what the question is. Then repeat the question. Everybody knows what the question is, and you then give your answer. Also, that you make sure that everybody understood the question correctly. Sometimes the student would ask a question in such a way that it's a bit unclear exactly what it is that he or she wants to know. But you got a good sense, or at least just repeat the question and ask, double check, is this what you meant to ask? In other words, you can paraphrase it, you can put it in your own words, just make sure that this is actually what the student asked, and then just repeat it for the whole class so that everybody heard the question before you then give your answer, or ask them, is there anybody that knows the answer and wants to actually share the answer with us? Then another reason might be, I want to buy a little time because I don't quite know the answer. I think we had this situation yesterday where you mentioned that, not too sure, I think it was Wiswa. I'm not too sure what the answer is, so I am repeating the question slowly, and as I'm repeating the question, my brain is working at 110 kilometers per hour to get to understand what the answer is. If you then get to the end of repeating that question and you still don't have the answer, we also discuss how you can actually refer it back to the group and ask, is there anybody with that answer? But acknowledge if you don't know. Just say, I really don't know. Does somebody know? Or if you know, throw it back to the group in any case for a discussion. When nobody then knows, or they have half the truth, you can add to it, or you can give the answer. Eye contact, we did speak about eye contact. Cover the room, choose your words carefully, respect the group, always respect for individuals and the group as a whole. Responding to individual concerns. I don't know if you heard of the technique, the parking lot. If anybody asks or wants to discuss something that doesn't relate to the topic of training, then you need to just point that out. We cannot discuss that now because we focus on the following topic, but you also don't want to just ignore that topic in totality. So have a flip chart somewhere in the corner at the back, call it a parking lot, list the item, the question that was asked, put the person's name next to it, and right at the end of the training, you've got a whole list of items on this parking lot. Just revisit it and say, okay, before we finish off this training, let's just see who's going to do what with this items on the parking lot. And you will find that normally those issues can be addressed by the person, the student who actually raised the issue. It might be something where they want to discuss their salary with the boss, or the performance appraisal results, or why didn't I get a bonus, or why am I working overtime so much? Or, it's normally an issue that they can resolve with the manager or the supervisor. But very important, just revisit the parking lot, get agreement as to who's going to do what, and then we move on. I had a technique with, and I working for Atlantis Diesel Engines. We always had issues, and there were company politics and grapevine issues, and everybody used the opportunity, because our training department was also a sub department of our HR department. So they would also always use the opportunity to ask these questions and asking for answer around increases and stuff like that. So I would then just have a box, the box where you get your reams of paper in. And before I use that box, I would ask them to list all the issues that bothers them on a little piece of paper. a separate piece of paper, an issue per piece of paper. And then they were quite keen and they write down everything and they think, at last our issues will be resolved and we're going to get answers for this. And then I take the box, walk around and they'd say, chuck that into that box. And then I put the box in the corner of the training room. I said, okay, so all those issues are now stored in that box. We can deal with it on other forums, but it's not going to be dealt with in this training forum because it has nothing to do with the topic and with the goal or the learning objectives that we're going to cover in this training. So it is just that sort of mindset of, okay, now I'm pretty much blocked for the rest of the training. I cannot raise those issues, which is a great thing. I'm going to focus on the training. If there's any of those issues that you feel you can actually use as part of the discussion, as part of the training. So let's say your training is about performance management, argument's sake, and there's performance management related, performance appraisal stuff that they've recorded on that little slip. Then you will take it out and you will use it then when the appropriate opportunity arrives. So that's a great way of doing that. Cover all parts of the room, do not bluff. We discussed that. Admit if you don't know, ask anybody else whether they know. If nobody knows, give somebody homework, go find out, Google University, come back and share with the team. Then resistance. I'm sure you've experienced students that actually doesn't want to be there. And, you know, there's various reasons for that. There might be personal issues, attitude towards the boss or the organization, or attitude towards the topic. Oh my goodness, first aid again. It feels like yesterday, 3 years ago, when we did this same course and now we've got to do it again. So this time, this time around, you want to make it interesting and you're going to use your fun exercises, learning by doing exercises if you haven't used that in the past, and you're going to encourage them to actually come back in 3 years' time and enjoy the training. Pushed out of their comfort zones. We spoke about the older participant. You might find that with the older participant, you know, very often they feel threatened by the young ones who can do this magic on social media and the cell phones and the computers and so forth. And you need to involve, you need to include them, encourage them to participate, ask the easy questions so that they feel comfortable. I've got that question, I can answer it. Next time around, they just open up for further discussion. And we also discussed the way that you can use small groups. You know, you're quite a participant. If they're in a small group, they open up and they feel more comfortable to participate. When they're back in the larger group, then they will participate as well. Literacy problems, language problems, definitely issues that we need to deal with and we need to find. And remember when we spoke about the barriers, we found ways and you shared ways of overcoming those barriers of literacy and language problems. All right, so problem situations, prevention strategies, planning, preparation, anticipation. Anticipation basically means that you gather information from this department or organization prior to the training, especially if it's the first time that you do that training for that organization. Talk to management, talk to the supervisors, talk to the employees and ask them what are the issues, what are the stuff that's sort of at the top of your minds at the moment. And then just be prepared if those issues are raised during the training. You can then decide, is it something that I want to use as part of the program, or is it something that we're going to put on a parking lot? But at least it won't be a surprise to you when an issue is raised at the time. Right, personal attacks. Keep your cool. That's a very important ground rule here. Keep your cool. Never lose your cool, in other words. Lower the pitch of your voice. Breathe deeply. Control your speed. Control your volume and attend to the non-verbal. Remember the body language, sending out messages. You control your speed, you control your volume, but your body language is so negative and you actually look away and you don't look at the student. That gives a whole negative message. So let your body language talk with your words that you are uttering to get the aligned message across to the student. Handle challenges with grace and professionalism. Then you get participant behavior. And this is where I said you might be recognizing yourselves, or you might be recognizing some of your students in the past, the talkative ones, the clueless ones, the rambling on ones, the belligerent, the stubborn. And you know, I would really, if you didn't get around to this reading work, I would really suggest that you read these sections to get some guidelines and advice as to how to deal with these situations. The silent ones, we want the silent ones to also participate, to participate because they've got valuable contributions to make. Most often they've got valuable contributions to make. So you know, don't stress out or put the silent person on the spot by asking a difficult question. Rather ask an easy question that you know the person has got the answer of. Get them involved, get them to open up, and you'll find that if they start to open up, then it's as if a sluice gate is opening up and they just want to talk and they want to participate. I had one of my participants, I did training in Limpopo province probably about 5-6 years ago. And I trained a group of nurses, and they doing training within their community on HIV/AIDS. And the one student said, when they did the introduction, she said, Saki, if you think I'm going to stand up in front of this group and talk to them, then you make a big mistake. I thought, oh my goodness, I've got a big problem here. How are we going to go any further with this student? And then when they started to work in their groups and they had to appoint a spokesperson, I actually encouraged the groups while I was conducting, I was encouraging the group that she was in to nominate her on the sideline as a spokesperson. And although she was very nervous with the first presentation on behalf of the group, she just, as if a flower was opening up, and she was eventually blooming and enjoying this. And it was as if she found out something about herself that she didn't know. And if she wasn't pushed in that direction of doing that presentation, stand up, talk in front of people, then she still would have sat back and say, I don't do this. I can't do this. So it's like the eagle, the mother eagle. If she doesn't push her baby out of the nest, then the baby will never learn how to fly. The baby will grow up to be a big eagle. The nest is probably definitely going to be too small. The mom is going to eventually refuse to feed this big child that's becoming an adult, and that bird will just eventually die. So don't be afraid to push in a nice way, push maybe in a lesser nice way, through encouragement, through support, and allow your students to do things, to try out new things. And I always say, when we do our mentoring and coaching training, that's what we as mentors need to do. We need to, you know, when you train your little one on how to ride a bicycle, you hold the handles and eventually you hold the saddle at the back. Eventually you let go and the little one is cycling along, and then they look around, they see, but mom or dad is not holding this thing anymore, and then they fall, boom. So what do? You don't leave them. You go and take your little Band-Aid strip and you put it on, and you say, okay, now let's try again. So you keep on trying, you keep on encouraging until they can then do it. And then you let go. You cannot hang on forever. And now what happens? They go around the corner and you don't see them anymore. Now you start to stress until you see them come around the corner, down the street, and you feel quite relieved. But again, it's that emancipation. It's that allow me to do it on my own. I'm never going to build confidence if you don't allow me to do it on my own. And this is what we need to do as facilitators, allow our students to emancipate. Within, the net is always there. You're going to be there, but you have to start slowly but surely remove the net as well, because you're not going to be around always. Para Fred, am I talking the truth?
Talking the truth, yes, we're not going to be around always.
But okay, you're still going to be around in person, but not around in the lives of your students all the time. They're going to be on their own at some stage. They might still call you and say, Para Fred, please help, I need your advice. So it's good to be always there as a net, but your net is going to reduce to something smaller. You're still going to be there, but you can't always be there with your whole net for everyone. I'm not talking to you specifically, I'm talking in general. But I guess that is what proper mentoring and coaching is all about, especially mentoring, to also let go. All right, know it all, class clown. Class clown can be quite disruptive sometimes. It can also sort of break the ice. The class clown is a sort of an icebreaker, a walking icebreaker sometimes, but don't let it disrupt the training. The negative ones, indifferent, personality clashes, side conversations, especially if you have friends sitting next to one another, they tend to have a chitty chat, and that can be quite disruptive. So how do you deal with the side conversations? Can I ask you, Philip, you as an experienced facilitator, you know that's always an issue, eh?
Yes, well, normally what I would do is ask what is this discussion and what has it got pertaining to the training, if there's anything they would like to share with us in detail. And that would bring them back to the training session itself. Because most of the time is a lot of nonsense that they're talking and making fun. And if it was a joke, they need to share it with the group.
Yeah, that's good one. That always works. You know, sometimes your students are actually discussing the topic. So when you say, well, that happened in terms of conflict handling, and then the friend wants to tell the other friend, oh, you know, that actually happened to me. So it's something valuable that they can actually share with the group, because we can then talk about that experience. But sometimes it's also just chatting of what are we going to do the weekend. And, you know, if you move closer, you ask that question, like you suggesting, would you want to share that with a group? Then they will immediately say, yeah, I want to share. Oh, no, it's okay. So they know they've been caught out, skinnering a bit, but you can also just make sure that the friends are not necessarily sitting next to one another when you come back after tea time, because you can move the nameplates around, make sure that the friends are sitting at opposite sides of the room. But then it mustn't look as if you just discriminated against the two friends. It must be applied to the whole group. So, or you can have a rule where you say, when you come back after tea time or after lunchtime, you're not allowed to sit next to the same person that you seated before lunchtime or tea time. Just one of those techniques. Sorry, I just want to close the door. My neighbor is mowing his lawn. Okay, and then there's some general guidelines. Stop the dysfunctional behavior, keep the individuals engaged, keep the rest of the group involved, respect the individual always, and learning to live with it. You know, if there's a difference of opinion, make peace with the fact that everybody's not necessarily going to agree with you, except, as I said yesterday, if it's a factual thing or it's a standard operation procedure, there's only this one answer, one correct way of doing things. Then your student needs to understand this is it. They may share alternatives, but when it comes to implementation, if this is our regulation, our legislation, our standard operation procedure, we cannot change it in any way at this stage. Okay, so the other reading for last night was the creative facilitation techniques. I'm really just going to scroll through it quickly. Again, if you didn't have a chance to get to the reading, this is quite a useful information. Grouping techniques, where they discuss puzzles. This is quite a nice one. You've got a puzzle with a certain number of pieces, and you hand out the pieces to the different individuals, and then they've got to find other individuals who's got pieces where that makes up the whole puzzle. So in other words, let's say you've got 5 pieces to a puzzle and you want to break up 5 groups, then you will have 5 different sets of 5 pieces. So you will then hand out the pieces, and when they can build their little puzzle, they've got the 5 individuals with the 5 pieces making up the puzzle. Candy, different flavors or colors of candy. Participant material, grouping cards. I sometimes use a technique where I would hand out I would hand out numbers, and then I ask the participants to shake hands to indicate what number each individual is. So we've got handshakes from 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5, depending on how many teams I want to form. And through the handshakes, the individuals will then find the others with the same number than what they have, and that will then be their team. So that's also a very nice technique. Assign roles, regaining control. Have you ever had a situation where you've had a very disruptive, talkative, rowdy group of students, and you break them up in groups and you just find it very difficult to get their attention to reform or to be quiet for further discussion? I had a group of teachers one day, 30 of them. We did assessor training, and we had various discussions throughout that training about how ill-disciplined the youngsters, the learners are these days. And then I thought, when I saw this group of teachers, when we did assignments and we did group work and we did a scavenger hunt, how unruly they actually were. I shouted at the top of my voice eventually. I said, can I just have your attention, please? We need to now continue the discussion. I was just totally unsuccessful. And then I said eventually, look, I'm going to get myself a whistle, the whistle that the referees used, and they must now excuse me, but that's going to be the only way. They said, no, it's not a problem at all. You can use the whistle. We just didn't hear you. Okay, so there's another technique, the auditory signals, Bob Pike's technique, where you clap your hands, where you just say, if you can hear my voice, clap once. If you can hear my voice, clap twice. And you carry on with 3 and 4 and 5 times. And eventually, your claps, more and more people start to clap, and it becomes louder and louder and louder. And then everybody claps along, and you can then say, okay, now then you stop clapping and you ask them to sit down. Quite a nice little technique. Then there's a discussion around props and theatrical techniques, posters, giveaways, use of themes, using your imagination, games. There's quite a long discussion around instructional games. And remember, with all these things, if you do a game, that's an experience. So you would introduce it, your students will experience that game, and you will then process it. So you're going to ask, what did you experience? Sharing of ideas, summarize the learning points for the so what, and then say, but is there any way that you can apply what you've learned from this experience? Don't ever forget about your experiential learning cycle. Advantages of games, factors to consider when you compile these games, adapting games to a training program, writing game questions and items, short answers, case studies, role plays, discussions, activity or process. And then when you facilitate the game, the guidance around the experiential learning cycle, what, so what, now what. Creative closings, small group summaries. So in other words, you break your groups in, you break your larger group into smaller groups, and you ask them to summarize what they've learned. appoint a spokesperson, and that spokesperson will then share with a larger group the summary of what they learned in the program. The full circle, if you start off with, for instance, if you ask your students to list their objectives or their expectations for the course on little post-it notes, and you put it up on a board, and right at the end of the training, you ask them to actually remove the post-it if that expectation were met. So hopefully all the post-its would have been removed, because it means that as a facilitator, you've covered all the expectations. But obviously it's also very important to understand if there's any of these post-it notes not removed, then you know there's an expectation not met. And you need to then take it off, look at it, discuss it, and make sure that you have follow-up actions or immediately address it. Also a self-assessment. Remember yesterday we spoke about when we sorted our activities for the time management course, we spoke about the opportunity to actually have a self-assessment as a pre-course assessment, and then a self-assessment as a post-course assessment right at the end. You can use that in that format. Here they refer to a physical self-assessment, 101 ways to make training active, your book that you've received. So there's quite a lot of reference to items or actions or activities in that book. Personal action plan, you can actually ask your students to write down exactly what did you learn, how are you going to apply what you've learned, and come up with very specific action steps. When are you going to monitor again? When are you going to evaluate the success of your implementation? And how are you going to share your successes? So you can say, look, I'm going to share it with my, during my team meeting, I'm going to share it with my team members, and they can give me a little prize for my successes achieved. And also reflections, where you can ask your students to think about the most important thing I learned in the session. As a result of this training, one thing I'm going to do differently. What I like about, the best about this training session was the following. So that then brings me to the training feedback document that I'm going to send on your email. Sorry about all the admin, but this is quite important for me. It's also important for just overall reporting on the successes of our training, what was identified as improvement areas, and how do we ensure that we continuously adjust our material, adjust our facilitation methods, our techniques to the benefit of our learners. So it's just a one A4 page. It's not a very complicated or complex, or it's not going to take a lot of time. So it's probably going to take you about 5 minutes, but please, I will send it this afternoon. If you can just complete it and send it back to me. I also need to give feedback to the EMS college who coordinated this training. They need to understand whether it was a success or not. All right, I want to just briefly discuss evaluation of training. And this is on page 136. 136. And when I started during the first session, I've mentioned the importance that we also need to understand whether the training actually made a difference. Did it address the original objective that we've identified, the need that we've identified? Not only immediately after the training, but very important, did my learners, my students actually go back to their work environment or their personal environments and actually implement what they've learned? Are they working differently? Are they working more efficiently? Are they contributing more or better to their work environment? And in the absence of that evaluation, there's such a big chunk of information just not available. So they can say, look, I've enjoyed the training and I really learned a lot. But then if there's no implementation, you can really say that it was wasted time, because implementation is really the proof of the pudding. And that's why we actually attended the training, to improve and to work differently. So I want to discuss the Donald Kirkpatrick model. Donald Kirkpatrick's model, that's on page 138. 138. Donald Kirkpatrick described evaluation of the effectiveness of training on 4 different levels. The first level is just that immediate reaction by the participants, just at the end of the training. So that evaluation form that I'm sending to you is a level 1 evaluation. So we can also see this as a smiling sheet. You give me feedback on the learning material, on the activities, on to what extent you can actually apply what you've learned. So it's that immediate feedback after the training. Level 2 would be whether learning took place. In other words, the knowledge transfer, where the knowledge transfer took place. You can use a pre-test, post-test. In your case, you're going to complete the knowledge questionnaire in your portfolio of evidence. So that is a good example of the level 2 evaluation. Then level 3 is where we evaluate whether there was a behavior change. How are they performing differently? You will measure this maybe 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 months afterwards. Maybe 6 months is too long. Maybe 3 months is a good sort of average, or 2 months. And you're checking with the supervisor, the manager of the student, and with the student, him or herself. Or if the student is also a manager, you check with the colleagues and the people reporting to them to get feedback in terms of whether the student is actually performing differently. Then level 4 refers to results. What is the impact on the bottom line? So you can use a control group. You can say, okay, we've measured before training, we measure after training, and we then determine whether there's a contribution to bottom line. Now, contribution to bottom line could be an increase in the number of customers. It could be a customer survey. In your case, you do a survey getting feedback from the community in terms of the services rendered. So you do that before the training. If you find that there was actually a improved satisfaction from your community members as your customers, then it means that the training did make a difference. Is there a better application of your budget? Is there a reduction in wastage? Henny and Cedric would like to know, can our tires last longer? Can we get good mileage on our vehicles to save cost on fuel? So that's the kind of bottom line savings that we're looking at when we're looking at level 4. Are there any questions on this Donald Kirkpatrick's model? Okay. All right, so I'm not going to bore you any further with discussions from my side. We're going to jump in talking about the mind map, the design matrix. Then you're going to get an opportunity to actually do that yourself within your teams. I just want to pause. So on your page 59, we're going to talk about writing an instructional plan. Now, I just want to read that first paragraph on page 59. The training approach described in this book can be summarized in one word: active. Active. The underlying philosophy is that adult participants are actively involved throughout the training session. The design and development strategies therefore reflect an active, experiential approach to training, allowing participants to discover ideas, principles, and concepts through a series of well-planned and well-executed structured experiences. Because the adult in particular learns by doing, not by being told, the design and the development process includes very few didactic elements. You may recall we spoke about pedagogical and andragogical approaches to learning, where the pedagogical approach is more the didactic, the teacher, the educator, and the andragogical is adult learning, learning through doing, interactive learning, and learning that relates to the world of work and their experience. Now, on the next page, 60, you can compare the design in training program is much like planning a trip. In both cases, you must ask yourself the following. So you ask the question who, with the trip is who is going. With a training session, you would say, who should participate? Who will my learners be? The when are we going? And training, when will I conduct the training? Where are we going? With training, where am I taking the participants in terms of outcomes? Remember our learning outcomes or learning objectives. What my candidate must know, be able to do with what attitude or value system. The why have we chosen this destination? With training, why am I conducting this training? So that all depends on the training needs assessment that you've done. What do we want to see and do with a trip? With a training, what do I want the participants to know or be able to do? And the how will I get there? And with the training, how will I communicate the information or develop the participants' skills? This is where we now, as facilitators, need to decide what would be the most effective facilitation methods to use, and how will I structure my program? And this is where we then get to the mind map, and more especially the design matrix. The major components of design is on page 61. An instructional plan identifies what will be accomplished, learning outcomes for the participants, what will be said or presented, in other words, the content, and how content will be communicated, the methods and the media. The purpose of the initial design document is to organize one's thoughts and sequence the material and activities to create the optimum learning experience and meet learning outcomes. After determining the objectives and before writing a detailed instructional plan, it is helpful to first design or lay out the course using a design matrix. This is truly the planning phase of the developmental process. So I just want to recap on what we've discussed. Writing an instructional plan is a major component of design. It consists of learning outcomes, what will be accomplished, the content, what will be presented, and the methods and the media, how the content will be communicated. The purpose of the initial design document is to organize one's thoughts and sequence the material and activities to create the optimum learning experience and meet learning outcomes. Now, let's look at the design matrix. And there's an example or a template for a design matrix on page 61. Design matrix is used to visualize the course or the session. It enables you to take a broad view of what you want to accomplish and how to meet the learning outcomes. It provides the framework or skeleton for the course, and it consists of the following: the duration of the activity, the content or learning points that needs to be covered, the method or the activities that we're going to use. So this is our facilitation methods, learning by doing, interactive, and then the materials and the aids that we will be needing for those activities. Now, I'm going to use an example, starting off with a mind map. Now, the mind map is merely used as a tool in this instance to gather information to determine what are we going to include in this training. So what will the content of training be? What are the other methods or tools or resources that you can use? You know what the training topic is, you know what the learning objectives are, and now you need to go out and find information. So other than a mind map, what other tools or resources can we use to gather information about what should be included in the training? What do you say? So anyone with an answer? What sources or information?
You can use case studies that you previously have done in the methods or activities. And
Right.
also you can add also new activities or new guidelines that came down or historical things that you want to put in there just to update the guys around about what's happening around the world also.
Okay, okay. Let's say it's a very sort of technical piece of equipment like a ventilator, for instance. Or you used the example yesterday of a what was it, the inhaler. Okay, that's much more basic, much more basic, but there's still a technique, there's a procedure, there's a different specific way of using that piece of equipment. Where would you find the information? Now you want to develop a learning program to teach a student how to use that piece of equipment, but you need to still write, you need to still decide, what am I going to include in the learning material? What will the content be, in other words? And then how am I actually going to transfer this knowledge to my student? But the first step is to gather the information about that piece of equipment. So where do you find the information?
Maybe in a textbook.
Textbook? Yeah.
You
There
can
might,
Google.
it might already be learning material available that you can just adjust. You don't have to reinvent the wheel. Yeah. Any other resources? Would you consider Google University?
Yes.
The internet
Use that.
is
Use that
always a source. Just make sure that you double check the correctness of the information, the currency of the information. Is it the most current information? You are also guided by legislation. You're guided by regulations. If it's a piece of equipment, you can actually use the, what is this, instruction manual. You will not use the instruction manual as in that format as a learning guide or a learning material. You will take that information and put it in a format that will be more user-friendly for your learners to actually learn. So yeah, depending on your subject matter expertise, you will then decide, how am I going to gather this information? In the olden days, we still went to, I know there's still libraries, but now these days we just go onto the internet to source information. But you know, in the olden days, it was basically a library and encyclopedias and books being available that we had to source for additional information.
It's okay.
Yes, sir.
I would go to, if this piece of equipment is being used, I would go to the people that is using it currently and get information from them where it is not used the way it should, or other people are using it, and which is the correct manner to use that. You
Good point.
know, I would go from there and,
Yeah.
and get information from them.
Good point. Yeah. Especially, you know, you're not only going to teach your student how to operate the machine. Obviously, that's very important. But what can possibly go wrong? What can happen in terms of a malfunction? I mean, if it's a matter of life and death for a patient, then you know we need to be able to tell our students what you must do if something so it should go wrong. So when you then consult with those people who's actually been using this piece of equipment in the past, you can actually ask them about what are the challenges, what can possibly go wrong, how did you deal with that situation? Because it's a one thing to just understand how to operate, but it's a quite an additional piece of information and skills that your student need if something should go wrong, that you also train them around that. And the valuable information you get from those people who's actually in the field and can share their experiences in using that equipment. Okay. So the mind map method is described on page 62. And we also, just before the mind map, we refer to researching the topic, and this is basically what we just discussed. So a mind map might be looking something like this. I just want to show you an example, and I'm sure many of you, if not all of you, have already used a mind map approach. And remember, we're using this technique just to gather information you have a group of experts around the table, they brainstorm ideas, and they could come up with a mind map for healthy living. And this is what it might look like. Healthy living. So you'll see a mind map, then have a center, indicate what the topic is, and then it branches out into stress, sleep, exercise, and diet. Oh, and health. And then each of these branches has got subsections where under sleep, you have tips, and then there's a whole list of tips here. Under diet, you've got fruit, vegetables, and breads and cereals. And under vegetables, you even branch out further with vitamins E, C, and A. On this side, stress, what to avoid, smoking, coffee, alcohol, and so forth. Causes, exams, work, relationship. All right, so it basically means you start at the core, you branch out into the main topics. From the main topics, you branch out into the detail linked to those topics. So I need to develop a mind map for driving a car. Mind map for driving a car. And you are all experts. You are all expert drivers. I want to develop a learning program to teach my students how to drive a car. So I'm consulting you as driving experts. And I know we've got Henny and Cedric there as really the master drivers in our group. So we will rely a lot on their input, but you others are all experts that can contribute to this. So before I compile the actual mind map, I just want your input to indicate what must be included in this training program, teaching my student how to drive a car. What do you say must be included? Vuiswa?
The focus on the road and the obstacles.
And
obstacles.
Okay.
Obstacles. Yes.
Right. Safety on the road. Be careful about obstacles. Right. What else?
Theoretical knowledge of science.
Yes. Philip, that is very important. So there will definitely be a theoretical, knowledge component. And part of that knowledge component will then be road signs and maybe even rules of the road. There goes our expert. Henny, don't run away. We need your input here.
Okay.
Right, what else?
I would say even before start driving, we should know the legislations about driving. When, what age, when, all of those things.
Absolutely. All legislation around actually driving, parking the vehicle, the rules of at a traffic light, where you allowed to make U-turns, where not, where you're allowed to park, where not, and so forth. Yeah. What else? What else would you like to teach your student?
Knowing your car.
Knowing the car, the different parts of the car. Yeah. So inside the car, outside the car, especially things like indicators and lights and brake lights, and then the parts of the car inside with, your brake pedal, your clutch, your petrol, and your gear lever, and so forth, and obviously the radio. Important. All right.
Possible dangers. What could happen if something goes wrong?
Sorry, Nathaniel, just say again, please.
The possible dangers. What can happen if something goes wrong?
Yeah, absolutely.
And what can you do?
Yep. And we also, I immediately think of defensive driving, to prevent those dangers from affecting us. Peter.
I say that they they have to have a good knowledge of all the regulations, as well as knowing all the controls and their purpose.
Okay, good. Excellent, excellent. All right, so I then would use that input from you, and as you give me input, I will then develop my mind map. So I've got a mind map developed with your input, and I'm just going to share that with you. So this is then our mind map for driving a car. We need to teach that student how to drive a car. Obviously, our main topic of our training program will be there in the middle. Then the main subsections would then be legislation, maintenance of the vehicle, parts of the car, and actually driving the car. So under legislation, we're going to have road signs, rules of the road, licensing, personal licensing, vehicle licensing. And you know, this is, I'm sure you can add to this mind map. It doesn't really cover everything that it's supposed to cover. Let's look at maintenance. Nobody mentioned maintenance, planned maintenance, unplanned maintenance. We need to check the air in the tires, the oil, the water, the petrol, or the fuel, parts of the car, external, internal. External, you've got the wheels and the indicators, the headlights, internal steering, clutch, brake, etc., etc. And then driving the car, I guess the first thing is clutch control, then parking, alley docking, parallel, and I think there's some more parking techniques here that I left out, and then safety. Can't even see what oh, defensive driving around safety. Okay, so just an example of a mind map for the program, training program, driving a car. Now, the next step, my next step or our next step would be to compile a design matrix for this program of driving a car, to compile a design matrix. Now, I just want to refer you back to page 61 with a template of the design matrix. And I will just show you an example of a possible design matrix for driving a car. Now, I think I have to, after this session, before I start to finalize my learning material, my assessment methods or guides that I need to assess my learners, and double check on the methods of facilitation, I need to consult with Cedric and Henny as the experts to give me further advice or to give me approval that this is actually the content which is correct in terms of, you know, training a student. So I'm just referring in real life, before we implement a training program, we need to get additional input from our experts. Well, you will always get input from your expert, but you need a final sign off just as approval that your program is correct, current, and address the need identified. So back to the design matrix. And this is what my design matrix would look like, or just an example of a design matrix. So I've got these headings: the duration of the activity, the learning point or topic that I need to cover, the method of facilitation. And this is critically important, that these methods are interactive, learning by doing. I use the experiential learning cycle: introduce, conduct the activity, process the activity, and then process, asking input: what did you experience? What's the lessons learned? And how are we going to apply what we've learned? And basically you do that with all your activities, that experiential learning cycle. So with this planning, with this design matrix, we said that the introduction, the method we're going to use is a lecturette. So it's a very short lecture, 10 minutes, and the aids and the resources we need is a PowerPoint software. We need a laptop, we need a projector. You probably need, not probably, you also need a screen for your image to be casted on. Then we're going to do safety awareness. We're going to show a video, we're going to show pictures, we're going to ask the students to do a case study, and they're going to have group discussions. And remember, experiential learning cycle with each of these items. After they've watched the video, you're going to process. What did you see? What did we learn? How are you going to apply? The same with the pictures, case studies, and group discussions. Again, we just list the items that we will need. With a case study, we've got a handout there. Pictures, we need to hand out, or we can show that on the slide of the slideshow. Then we're going to discuss legislation, rules of the road, and road signs. And it's very important that you don't include too much information in this column. So, but you can include bullet point wise main points of the topic if you want to. The idea is that this is not your training material. The training material still needs to be developed. So this is just the guide, and we don't want to overpopulate this with information, although we do want to cover the main items. With legislation, we're going to use a short lecture. We're going to do a learning tournament where we break up our team into smaller groups. We're going to ask them questions. The groups is going to respond. We're going to keep the score. We're going to have a winning team. It's going to be fun. We're going to then go through the experiential learning cycle again. Case study, a quiz. We're going to also ask questions, and they're going to participate by giving these answers. We need handouts, quiz handout. Then we're going to talk about maintenance, planned maintenance and unplanned maintenance through lecture read, group inquiry, and a case study. And and these are the resources we need. Then we're going to discuss the parts of the car. Oh yes, and by the way, every time I've included the duration, 60, 60, 45 minutes, and then parts of the car, 60 minutes, lecture read, pictures, demonstration. This is what I'm going to need. And then driving the car, clutch control, parking, and open road. And the methods is going to be demonstration. I'm going to demonstrate my students how to do it. I'm going to allow them to practice under my supervision and coaching. And what we need for this is the vehicle and the practice area, you know, the parking bays and the cones and so forth. And this is going to take us 4 days. So that's then, well, we can say it's a week-long training program. And the biggest portion of this training will actually be demonstrating, practicing how to drive a car. Any questions on this? Does it make sense?
Yes, Saki.
Yes, sir.
You can also make use of these days of simulator.
Simulator. Wow. Yeah. Yes. Fancy. Like a simulator to learn how to fly aircraft. The pilots do that. But you also have a simulator for driving a car. Excellent. But ultimately,
me and Cedric went to Port Elizabeth, and we had a look at a simulator. So they've got a huge trailer, and in the front part, there's some computers, and you do your K53 test there.
Wow.
And after completing it, it gives you the result, and then there's a steering wheel with a screen inside that same trailer where they actually give you certain scenarios how to drive the vehicle.
My goodness. So it takes you through, you basically pull away, you drive at high speed, you go around corners, everything, simulating the whole thing.
Yeah, and also the weather change, so it starts to snow or rain or strong winds and whatever, so you can change it.
Sure. And can you also change your surface of your road, in other words, off-road and so forth?
Yes, everything.
Oh, amazing. So
when are we getting that, Annie?
Annie, wanneer kry julle daai ding?
Yeah, of course.
Well, if I've got a couple of millions, I will buy one.
But that shouldn't be a problem for you and Cedric.
PE.
Sure, but that's expensive. I could have imagined. Is that on a hydraulic system where you can actually feel the vehicle moving?
No, it's a one without that.
Oh, okay.
We engage with myself, Cedric, and the director, and one of the previous doctors that worked for us with Seaput. And we look at the design where we actually want to take an old ambulance and actually change it into a simulator that's also on a trailer, but it's working with hydraulics. So if you hit the pavement, it will tell you, listen, you go over the pavement, whatever.
Wow.
But not only that, we actually want to take it further, and that is where Parafret and these guys coming in. So you also simulate a scene where you had to respond to, and then you also do your if you intubate the patient or whatever, so that you can get we call it CMEs, and you get points.
Wow, that's amazing. And once you've developed that piece of equipment, you can become millionaires yourselves because you're going to market it worldwide. Because that sounds very, very effective. Okay, so I would suggest we take our tea break. Can we be back at 5 to 11, please? 5 to 11. And then I'm going to ask you to work in teams, come up with a topic for an 8-hour training session, do a mind map, brainstorm content, do a mind map, and then do a design matrix where you're going to decide what's the topics, what's the facilitation methods, how are we going to sequence this so that it makes logical sense and it adds to the effectiveness of learning. And you're going to ask somebody in your team to actually record the mind map and the design matrix. So you can start to think of topics so long during tea time. Try to make that topic, choose a topic that's more sort of practically orientated, not only theory, because that lends itself to quite a variety of facilitation methods. And if you can, if you printed that page 16 with the cross-referencing to the facilitation methods and the page numbers, then you can also take that out, because this method, this column where we indicate the methods, must be those interactive methods, learning by doing. And lecturette must only be a short portion of the learning. So you can use the lecturette, the short lecture, but the bulk of the learning must be through or via the training activity or the facilitation activity. Okay, so I'll see you at 5 to 11 then.